just answering questions with WAPTech and the futility of doing archiving involving newspapers. So I'm going to cover that first because that's more useful. Speaking of MP, something strange came to my attention last week in the news that Peter Ball, former Bishop of Lewes, had died and he had been living in a house owned by the Duke of Cornwall or something, friend of Prince Wales, and a disgrace as of about 4 years back. He is time and again described as having had inappropriate relations with such and such. They appear repeatedly stopped short of him being called something horrible, presumably because of embarrassment to important parties, or because they don't have enough evidence, and accusing somebody publicly of something when you don't have evidence for it is actually reckless. It's technically possible, even though this is some sort of priest or something, that he may not have actually been guilty. This is actually a real problem. I'm one of many people on the internet that's been accused of something on purpose that wasn't true. We just take accusation as fact, and unfortunately, after reading about a few things today, there is actual cover-up in Britain of illegal and inappropriate actions. I'm not going to specify what it is because I'll get my YouTube channel shot down again. And the trouble with it is that actually did and sometimes still does happen. It's usually for the police covering their ass or whatever. Anyway, but not necessarily embarrassment to important parties. I recognize him from an interesting news footage when the BBC interviewed him in 1990, July 20th. He is speaking of his great sadness at the shocking killing of a Member of Parliament, that's what MP means, Ian Gow, who had been supposedly blown up by the IRA. Knowing what we know now, and given the bishop was one of the last people to speak on the phone with this person, should not the bishop have been thought of as a suspect of murder? But it was touted as the work of the IRA. They never claimed that they did it, according to this person. Mr. Gow was very well informed and very well placed to expose wrongdoing, kind of bishop was involved in, or is alleged to have been involved in. I want to point out someone else was accused of inappropriate sexual activity. One of the British people who ran something. He's a monster. Okay. Then you ask the specific people who decades earlier were supposedly violated, and they keep saying vague things. Then when they go to court, there was no sexual activity. It would be considered legally these days sexual assault, simply because it had a sexual aspect to it, but it was literally somebody being physically assaulted while they were partially clothed. Or in another case, a person was assaulted and they end up getting their pants pulled down. So it was claimed or asserted to be a sexual assault. Now, I'm not defending any of these people. What I'm saying is, when someone won't give you the details as to what happened, that means they're refusing to provide evidence. And that's usually a red flag. Just pointing this out. No, none of these people I consider innocent, and I don't consider them guilty. I don't have to deal with it. I don't care. I honestly don't have a reason to care about people who you can't really convict, because I'm in a country that requires that you have proof before you claim that a person's really guilty. We don't actually follow those rules socially, though. No, I'm not trying to defend them. It's just that every time I look into these stories, the people making the accusations won't specify what happened. They keep it vague so that they can keep their story from ever having any changes by keeping it vague. And it's not that I'm oversensitive because I'm guilty of something or whatever. This is exactly what was done to me on the internet, and then when it comes down to it, the person was outright lying by impersonating me and creating fake evidence. I have a big problem with this kind of shit. Then I'm not talking about false accusations. I have a big problem with the things they were accused of. Everybody does. That's kind of why it can work when you become vague about it. So yeah, decades later, someone won't explain it. But let's go on with your question and answer here. Mr. Gow had actually had a spat with Thatcher and seniors regarding constitutional matters. Perhaps the killers planted their device while something like a phone call distracted the target or something. Now this is a lot of speculation, so I'll just get to this. This isn't just the Wikipedia article. Ian Gow was aware he was a potential IRA assassination target, and this was widely publicized, apparently. He left his phone number and home address on the telephone directory instead of having it removed and preferably moving after the IRA became active. And this was unlike most British MPs at the time. His Austin Montego car was parked in a driveway of his house where it could be easily gotten to. He basically decided not to allow people to intimidate him, but this cost him his life. 1990, July 30th, at 8:39 a.m., a 4.5-pound Semtex car bomb detonated as he reversed out of his driveway. It was easily done, and this is very stereotypically done by, at the time, IRA, basically, right? Or not. You can decide. The thing you can't find. 1990, August 1st, a couple of days later. The IRA claimed responsibility for killing him. The reason they gave is because he was very close to a close associate of Thatcher. Even if they didn't get along, everybody said the same thing. We disagreed with him, but he was needed. He was necessary. There's this misconception people have in the United States that if somebody disagrees with you, they're your mortal enemy. In Britain at the time, even if people were very hot-headed about things, the assertion that someone didn't agree with you was not a good reason to kill them. It was not presumed that you should harm someone because that was bad form. Even throwing a punch. Britain is the House of Commons, etc. The whole country is notorious for people. You know, the joke is that we thought it was a boxing match, but it was just a hockey match in Canada. The joke in Britain is, oh, we thought it was a boxing match, but it was just politics. But literal killing people is not that common, and that's kind of the thing. But anyway, British policy on Northern Ireland was the other reason they cited. Now, this was unfortunately left, as the only link I can find, to the Washington Post. Everybody's heard me already say this, but the Washington Post has a habit of doing more book burning than Adolf Hitler. IRA says it attacked lawmaker. August 1st, 1990, Washington Post. But they deliberately erased their archives, even if you pay them money for it. There's no reason to. Many people don't get this, but having a gigantic freaking archive of pure text, because it was pure text, somebody went to the trouble of turning all that text that was on pages into text that you could actually peruse. Text compresses very, very well, and unless someone's accessing it, doesn't cost any bandwidth, and archives are the lowest common denominator for data storage. To wit, a newspaper, any newspaper, erasing its archive by saying it costs money is lying. It doesn't matter if you have 100 years worth of data. It can be compacted and compressed gradually over time, and you can get volunteers that'll do it because they don't want you erasing history. 80% of the history records we have are in newspapers, and this one is gone because the Washington Post would rather run stories about Justin Bieber. Fuck the Washington Post. But yeah, the IRA did take responsibility at the time. They did it rather quickly afterwards, and it was buried under other news stories, which is the reason that the only archives I can find are about dumb crap, like somebody had a nip slip, or somebody was sleeping around. Thanks, Washington Post. So I'm assuming this could be easily not really true, but there we are. Also, it should be pointed out the vagueness of young men versus teenagers. If you were gay in the 1990s or any other era, and you did anything, it was illegal in some countries, and they would do it under the claim of violating young people, even though young men would refer to people who were up to 27 years of age, and that is actually something that happened in Britain. Also, I should point out, in the 70s, child pornography was not illegal in the United States, and before that, in Britain. These are pieces of history a lot of you don't know about. No, I'm not kidding. It was not declared illegal. And in some countries, as long as it was done a specific way, it was considered not made to be able to be illegal. It took decades of demanding that laws be passed against the shit to get it off of being in paper form. Once the internet happened, it became a big problem because it was grandfathered in. There are still images on the net that are overt, illegal pornography that are not illegal. because they refuse to make them illegal. That's something I would find suspicious. That's what you want to look into, not some satanic ritual abuse or pedophile rings. Why was it the 1970s and 60s this pornography was not illegal in every single country? You might want to look into that. And young men and teenagers, why don't you just say, how old was the person? Was it consensual? It can't be consensual, but did they claim it was consensual? And why is everybody being vague about this years later instead of being very specific? If this is a traumatizing occurrence, yes, you're going to try to blot it out. But what you see is references to a very old traditional behavior called corporal punishment, but basically pulling someone's pants down and spanking them. I'm not kidding. This is the trouble. We have a mixture of things we'd like to forget about our own culture in Britain and in the United States, both societies, including not making shit illegal that obviously should have been. All right? And people being deliberately vague because they know that strengthens their case by providing less evidence and less information and refusing to clarify their testimony. And this goes along with my attitude about the whole thing, that I'm very glad that in the United States, and I'm assuming in some ways in Britain, that you're innocent until proven guilty. I just don't appreciate the fact that people don't care about that. No, I'm not defending any of these people. They're obviously monsters. But it doesn't help when the accuser makes it sound like something you'd hear on Twitter when someone's avoiding saying the truth. I don't know how to rip this apart and fix it. But anyway, the IRA did actually take responsibility. And yes, it is the fault of a newspaper not providing that information, or you'd know that. And this is the internet era where an entire newspaper is 14 kbytes if you compact it. I tested it. If it's in pure text, you can compress the living shit out of it. But they don't have that technology? Sounds like someone's erasing history and Fahrenheit 451 is coming to pass. I used to greedily archive these files. I don't have the room anymore. Actually, I do. All of us do. There's no reason for this deletion. There's no reason for us to forget our past except that we're embarrassed by it, and there's no reason for us to act like we can't look this up. Next question or comment. They should have left a semi-auto behind, but no, somebody wanted to leave an Italian-made Carcano, Lee Harvey Oswald. Or, instead of using this rationale, Lee Harvey Oswald didn't give a shit about the gun because he figured he had done a good job hiding his tracks, even though he left a palm print on the gun. He left a palm print on a part of a gun that you would assume wouldn't leave fingerprints. You might have even read that somewhere. Velvet boxes don't have fingerprint capability. Wooden rifle stocks do. So does the metal of the gun. It doesn't have to be a full print. He used an alias. He unfortunately used the same alias repeatedly that led back to where it could connect to him. There's a bunch of other stuff people don't bring up when it comes to the shooting of JFK, because it cuts out their ability to say this kind of crap. Perhaps to blame certain Italian people and take some heat off the CIA, Mossad, and other intel folks. So now you invoke Jews did it. Code word Mossad. JFK had a fist-sized hole in the back of his head. Dallas police paraded that rifle around the police station. Unbelievable that anyone ever think 3 shots came out of that piece of shit. Counterpoint. I fired that rifle, not that specific one. I'm one of those people that was a masked test person in Eastern Oregon who did this. You're wrong. I don't have to explain it to you. You just don't know what you're talking about. But I waited till the Wikipedia article had some data. Nobody's seen him shoot, no fingerprints or residue. They found fingerprints and residue. He disposed of his clothing. He was wearing, he also had access to the top of that building. Colonel Fletcher proudly got it right. Too much money to be made in the war to have somebody come along and shut the whole operation down. JFK dad wanted to take out the Rothschilds' grip on the finances and taxpayers' money. And yet you do not want regulation of the banksters at all because you keep screaming Republican bullshit. And then you invoke Jews did it too. Eisenhower said military-industrial complex. Yes, he did. Who do you think paid them? Still about oil and agreement Israel based on, yeah, Jews did it again. Caesar, Buttress, blah, 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 blah. Everyone out there, things are piling up for them, that's for sure, etc. Thanks for expressing your opinion. It's invalid.